Good evening. So good to see you all here tonight. Welcome to Loyola University Maryland's 30th Annual Martin Luther King Convocation. And whether you're joining us here online or in person here at Evergreen, we are so happy that you're with us. My name is Terry Sawyer, and I have the honor of serving as Loyola's 25th president, the Jesuit University in Baltimore, Loyola University, Maryland. And every year, we have the privilege to begin the spring semester with this convocation. It's an important tradition for us, especially as a Jesuit Catholic university committed to social justice, intellectual reflection, and engagement with the entire world. And this week, we're joining many universities and cities and communities across the nation to mark Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy through service, reflection, advocacy, and action. And today, in the state of Maryland, we celebrate the inauguration of our new governor, Wes Moore. Absolutely. Quick aside, this is not on the script, and this makes Rita very nervous, but Wes Moore lives right down the street. And Courtney and I live here on campus, and we walk around the neighborhood, and we walk right in front of Wes's house. And our son, Patrick, volunteered and then ultimately worked on the Wes Moore campaign. And one day we were walking, and there were all these SUVs out front, and here comes Wes Moore out the door. We're seeing him. He's going to work. And my wife yells out, "I'm Patrick Sawyer's mother." And I said, "What about me? I'm the president of Loyola. I work right up the street." But as we know, Wes Moore is our first black governor and only the third black governor in our entire nation. Absolutely. So this is a moment to appreciate that we have made progress in society, but we also need to reflect on how much work we have left to do. The work that still lies ahead is what brings us here for this very important conversation that we're going to have tonight. This convocation also offers an opportunity to convene our community in a very special way. We are not only launching the spring semester, but also continuing the important, ongoing conversations about the legacies of race and racial justice in America. And here at Loyola, we recognize the value of these conversations, the necessity of these conversations, and the even greater value of action within and beyond our community as we work for greater peace and greater justice. This is critical work on campus. It's critical work that we do in our city and throughout the world. And help guiding us in this work here at Loyola is Dr. Rodney Parker, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, and it's my pleasure to introduce Rodney and welcome to the stage now. Dr. Parker.
Good evening. Thank you, President Sawyer. I want to join him in welcoming all of our students, faculty, staff, administrators, alumni, and especially our Baltimore neighbors and those from the surrounding areas. We thank you for joining us this evening. Since its inception, the Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation has engaged a challenging, complex questions about justice and how it is realized in our world. Each year, we have experienced the expertise of many noted scholars and practitioners who help to push our world to become a more equitable and just place for all. Tonight will be no different. Your presence, either in person or online, demonstrates your interest in learning more about these issues, engaging with them, and considering how you might be an advocate and proponent of change in our world. I hope this convocation, after this convocation, you will have plenty to think about, and that you will look for other opportunities to focus on these issues through the Office of Equity and Inclusion website and programming throughout the year. This evening, we have a wonderful program for you to enjoy, and I want to welcome Mrs. Rona Little, Loyola's Equity and Inclusion Specialist, who will introduce our speaker for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. We are delighted and honored to welcome to our Martin Luther King Convocation one of the most distinguished voices in theological and social ethics, author and social justice advocate, the Reverend Bryan Massingale. Thank you, Father Massingale, for being with us this evening. Father Bryan Massingale is a priest of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. He earned a Doctor of Sacred Theology and Moral Theology at the Alphonsian Academy in Rome. He is the James and Nancy Buckman Professor of Theological and Social Ethics at Fordham University and the Senior Fellow in its Center for Ethics Education. Before his role at Fordham, he was a Professor of Theology at Marquette University. A leader in Catholic theology, he is the President of the Society of Christian Ethics, a former Convener of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium, and a former President of the Catholic Theological Society of America. He also serves on the editorial board of Theological Studies, one of the premier Catholic journals of theology. Father Massingale is the author of Racial Justice in the Catholic Church, which received a First Place Book Award from the Catholic Press Association of the U.S. and Canada. He's also a public intellectual who frequently addresses issues of racial and sexual justice on platforms such as NPR, ABC News, The Huffington Post, and the Associated Press. His current research projects explore the intersections of race, sexuality, and faith, both in social life and Catholicism. Father Massingale's contributions to justice advocacy and scholarship have been recognized on numerous occasions. He is the recipient of 4 honorary doctorates and Marquette University's highest award for teaching excellence. He received the YWCA's Eliminating Racism Award in 2014 and was the recipient of Project Equality's Religious Momentum Award for his efforts in promoting diversity in the Catholic Church. In 2017, he received the Pope John XXIII Award from the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests for his tireless efforts to create a world where the dignity of each person is respected and protected. And on Maryland Day in 2021, Loyola presented him with the Ignatian Citizenship Award, given to individuals who embody Ignatian citizenship, people who intuitively understand, value, and live out the ideals of St. Ignatius of Loyola. Although that presentation happened virtually, we are so happy that he is here with us on campus this evening. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Father Bryan Massingale to Loyola University, Maryland.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. My first visit in 2021, as you heard, took place over Zoom. So it's just me in my New York apartment talking to a faceless group of faces on a computer screen. And I can say that you are much more welcoming in person. I mean, seriously, I've gone to a lot of Jesuit institutions. You are probably the standout in your hospitality. So Loyola, Maryland, you've got it going on. So give yourself a round of applause, absolutely. Tonight's not going to be a very long address, because I think that it's much more enjoyable for the audience and for me personally when we have an interview kind of situation where people ask me questions, I have no idea what's coming, and I just think it's more spontaneous. But I do want to begin by talking about the legacy of Martin Luther King and the reason to go beyond the kind of sanitized holiday version of King that we all too often get subjected to around the King Day. And so I want to talk tonight about dreaming while black. The poet Langston Hughes, in a poem that I had to memorize in 5th grade, talked about dreams when he said, "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly." Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. 60 years ago, a young black minister addressed what was then the largest assembly of civil rights protesters in the nation's history. He recounted the nation's legacy of broken promises, which he described as checks returned marked insufficient funds. He narrated the great trials and tribulations that so many had endured to be there: harassment, beatings, and the horrors of being crammed in dark, narrow jail cells for their convictions. Yet, he implored them to go back and to continue their grinding, treacherous, dangerous work for justice. And I quote him, because you see, we only listened to the last 5 minutes of the speech. It's 20 minutes long, but before we get to the part about the dream, he said, go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. And then at the urging of Mahalia Jackson, he shared a dream, a litany of inspirational visions of what one day will be because of what they dared to do now. Martin Luther King dreamed while black. And it wasn't just his dream. It was a dream, he said, that was deeply rooted in the American dream. I've always been fascinated by the black imagination, that despite the horrors of our situation, we find ways to imagine new possibilities and to not be content with what is. Martin Luther King dreamed while black. But we now have to look forward, and we have to ask ourselves some questions. Questions inspired by another Langston Hughes poem. What happens to a dream deferred? Because you see, we remember that dream, but we can be forgiven for looking at that dream and wondering what happened to that dream, and whether dreaming while black is an exercise in escapist futility. Because when we look around at our nation, and yes, we applaud the fact that Maryland has its first black governor, but we also look around and we realize that black bodies are arrested and harassed and surveilled and even killed for sleeping while black. Ask Breonna Taylor. Or for jogging while black. Ask Ahmaud Arbery. Or for shopping while black. Or for breathing while black. Ask George Floyd. Or for playing in a park while black. Ask Tamir Rice. Or for praying while black. The Mother Emanuel 9. When we think about the challenges of dreaming while black, praying while black, jogging while black, studying while black, living while black, we can be forgiven for asking the question, is dreaming while black simply an exercise in escapist futility, or even worse, is it a dereliction of responsibility? Dreaming while black forces us to look at Martin Luther King's dream and to read and to question the narrative that we've been given, because you see, so often when we think of Martin Luther King, we fossilize him on that August 28, 1963 moment, forgetting that he lived for almost 4 or 5 years after that. And later in his life, in the last sermon that he preached at Ebenezer Baptist Church, he returned to his dream. In a sermon called A Christmas Sermon for Peace, in that sermon in 1967, he confessed that shortly after offering the nation his dream, and I quote him here, he said, "I started seeing it turn into a nightmare." He saw, he said, his dreams shaken by the horrific deaths of 4 schoolgirls when white supremacists bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. He related how his dream became a nightmare when he witnessed the nation's callous indifference to the plight of the black poor in the nation's ghettos. The dream, he said, became a nightmare when he saw how so many turned to violent uprisings as they saw little hope for change from their nation's fellow citizens. And finally, he related that he saw his dream in America become a nightmare as he observed the insanity of an unjust war that claimed the lives of tens of thousands of the poor. He concluded saying his dream became a nightmare, and he says, quote, "Yes, I am personally the victim of deferred dreams and blasted hopes." King had been betrayed by a nation's persistent, perhaps endemic record of broken promises. Indeed, he came to realize that the American project needed what he called a fundamental revolution of values. And yet, in that sermon, he continues to imagine. He continues to dream while black. He says, "In spite of that, I still have a dream because you can't give up in life. If you lose hope, somehow you lose that vitality that keeps life going. You lose the courage to be, the courage that helps you to go on in spite of it all." And so today, in 1967, he says, "I still have a dream, but," and this is why we don't ever talk about this part of the dream. You see, in 1963, he said his dream was rooted in the American dream. In 1967, he does not place his hope in the American project, which is perhaps why we don't study it that often, and we don't recall it on the holiday. We have to sanitize the memory. Rather, his dream is anchored in something bigger than any nation's convictions. It's anchored in that something or someone beyond this world's horizons. His dream is rooted in his understanding of the will of God. Let's listen to the 1967 dream. He says, "I still have a dream today that one day the idle industries of Appalachia will be revitalized, and the empty stomachs of Mississippi will be filled, and brotherhood will be more than a few words at the end of a prayer, but rather it will be the first order of business on every legislative agenda. I still have a dream today that one day justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I still have a dream today that in all of our state houses and city halls, people will be elected to go there who will do justly and love mercy and walk humbly with their God. I still have a dream today that one day war will come to an end, that people will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and that nations will no longer rise up against nations, neither will they study war anymore. I still have a dream that this nation can be listed from the councils of despair and bring new light into dark chambers of pessimism. He still has a dream, but it's anchored in something far beyond the American dream or the American project. He continued to dream while black. Now, why is this important, and why do I exhort us to dream? Because I have a conviction that we will never solve our nation's persistent, endemic, perhaps permanent problems with race unless we attend to the realm of the Spirit. And in this, I'm joined by the famed racial justice advocate Michelle Alexander, who gave up her lucrative law practice and returned to and went to Union Theological Seminary to study theology. And people are like, why would you want to study theology? Man, we only do that at Jesuit institutions. We have to take courses in it. It's a requirement. Oh, some of you are laughing, saying, you know. I know, because I teach you guys. I understand. In discussing her decision to leave the legal profession and studying theology, she wrote this. She said, "I know there is something much greater at stake in justice work than we often acknowledge. Solving the crises we face isn't simply a matter of having the right facts, graphs, policy analyses, or funding. And I no longer believe we can win justice simply by filing lawsuits, flexing our political muscles, or boosting voter turnout. Yes, we must do that work, but none of it, not even working for some form of political revolution, will ever be enough on its own." She continues, "Without a moral or spiritual awakening, we will remain forever trapped in political games, fueled by fear, greed, and the hunger for power. White supremacy is not simply a legal question or a political question." She says, "At its core, America's journey from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration raises profound moral and spiritual questions about who we are, individually and collectively, who we aim to become, and what we are willing to do now." White supremacy, anti-blackness, is a spiritual malady, a soul sickness. And yes, we have to do DEI work, absolutely. But without a spiritual foundation, that work will be ineffective. I'm haunted by a quotation from Albert Einstein, who said that no problem can be solved at the level of consciousness that created it. If we want to create a new world, we need new ways of living, new ways of thinking, new ways of acting, new ways of being. We need a new spirit. And so tonight, I invite you, I exhort you to dream. Because in the midst of ecological calamities, the terror of war, xenophobic violence, we need not less dreams, but more. But more. We need to be attuned to the realm of the Spirit and marry our practices of critique to discourses of hope. And so tonight I look forward to our conversation in which we can look honestly at our world and dream, not in an escapist way, but to dream as an act of subversive agency and have a sense of divine dissatisfaction with the way things are, and go forward to engage what Martin Luther King called the long, bitter, but beautiful struggle for a new world, a better world. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Loyola, let's fly. Let's soar. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Massingale. Moderating our discussion this evening will be Dr. Karsonya Wise Whitehead, the founding executive director of the Karson Institute for Race, Peace, and Social Justice, and professor of communication and African American studies here at Loyola. Dr. Whitehead is also the award-winning radio host of Today with Dr. K on WEAA 88.9 FM and a columnist for the Afro newspaper. Thank you, Dr. Whitehead, for being with us this evening.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited and have been looking forward to this conversation.
I'm looking forward to it too. Your resume is pretty impressive and intimidating. So I'm like, ooh. I have no idea what she's going to ask me. So this is totally unrehearsed. So this is going to be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
So I actually want to start with this notion of the dream.
Okay.
You said that we need to dream while Black. We need to dream as human beings.
Yes.
So I go into schools here in Baltimore City, and I work with young people. And I have young people who tell me, I don't have too many dreams beyond where I am at this moment because I don't think I'm going to survive getting out of high school. Mm-hmm. So in situations like that, where they see death or mass incarceration in their everyday experience, how do we teach them, convince them, or even model for them how to dream?
That's a great question, because dreams, hope, is a non-rational enterprise. Mm-hmm. You can't prove hope. You can only inspire people to hope. And I think that hope is carried by example. So I was at a professional conference recently, and I shared with them that one of my prized possessions is a Webster's Encyclopedic Dictionary of the English Language, black leather bound with gold pages, all 973 pages of it, given to me by my grandmother on my 8th grade graduation. And people always looked at her and said, why are you giving a 14-year-old black boy in Milwaukee's inner city an encyclopedic dictionary? And her words were, because someday he's going to need it. Now, I grew up in Milwaukee's inner city, and my siblings had a sarcastic name for our neighborhood grocery store. We called it Rats and Roaches Incorporated. Now, think about what it means to be a young adolescent, and you know that your grocery store is infested. Mm-hmm. My grandmother's gift did not deny my reality, but was her way of saying, whatever you see around you, that is not the limit of your possibility. And I think one of the things that how do we help our children to have dreams? I think sometimes we as adults need to carry that dream for them. Because I certainly didn't see it, but my grandmother refused to let me be defined by the circumstances I lived in. It wasn't a denial of reality. It was simply saying, this reality is not the whole story. And so whenever I hear about, the fact that, 1/3 of black men are in the criminal justice system. I would say, yes, that's true, but that's not the whole truth. That means that 2/3 are not.
Right.
We never talk about that story.
Right.
We don't ever say 2/3 are not. And we don't talk about the unjust system that got them there in the first place, that a lot of our black men are in these caught in mass incarceration for crimes for which white people are not incarcerated. So we need to tell that story too. But to go back to your story, there's no one way of helping our students see that, but I do think that we as adults have the responsibility of helping our young people to nurture those dreams and to never let them give up on them, despite everything they see around them, and to challenge them to say that's not the limit of your possibility.
Which leads me to think about your own work.
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking at an article that was entitled Black Gay Catholic Priest
Me?
Working Hard for a Racial and LGBTQ Inclusive Church, which is a lot in its title. And it's a lot in terms of identity politics, in terms of what you stand for, because you write about how you were going to leave the Catholic Church once you started coming into your own kind of sexual awareness, and you decided to stay in it. So can you talk about that? I guess two pieces. Being black as a Catholic priest, being gay as a Catholic priest, and maybe being black and gay as a Catholic priest.
Wow. Well, where do we start? Where do we start? Let me back into the question by telling a story that happened when I came out to my parents, when I had that conversation with my parents. It was after a Sunday dinner, and it was just me and my mom and dad. And, everyone was in a good mood. I thought, this is good. And so I said, well, before they got from the table, I said, well, before you guys go, there's something I need to tell you. I want to share with you the fact that, I was in Rome studying, and now I'm going to be back home living, and I want you to know that I'm gay. And my dad was like, you're joking, right? And I said, no, this is true. And his question was, it's hard enough being a black man in America. Why do you have to be gay too? And I said to him, you're right. There are folks in America who will not like me because I'm black. There are folks who will not like me because I'm gay. And there are folks who will not be able to deal with both of them together. But then I said to him, you made me the kind of man who could do this, because you told me that if people don't respect you, they don't deserve you. And I said to him, it's your example of making me the man I am that I can stand in this truth. And if they don't respect me, they don't deserve me. And he sat for a long time, and he said, no man can tell another man how to live his life. If this is who you say you are, then it's on me to accept it. Now, I was not expecting that from my dad. And so, into the Catholic Church. If they don't respect you, they don't deserve you. There are times when I have put the church in a timeout corner. And notice how I put that. I didn't take a time out from the church. I put the church in a timeout corner. Because there are times when the disrespect that is conveyed by the official teachings of the Catholic Church and by many Christian churches are just almost too much to bear. And I'm putting the church in a timeout. But what brings me back to this is the conviction that God doesn't make a mistake. Who I am by God's grace. And that God knew what God was calling when God called me to the priesthood. And so God wants me to be here. I don't know why sometimes, but I do know God wants me to be here, and that this is a sacred work that I have to do. And that's why I'm here. And I know that, there's a price to be paid. There are dioceses I can't speak in. I've gotten invitations to speak revoked. I will also say candidly that some of the most difficult experiences I've had have come from fellow priests who, because I'm public about who I am, I become kind of radioactive. They say, well, we can't be with you because if we are, what are people going to say about me? And I'd say, nothing they're not already saying. I mean, hello? But despite that, I am who I am because I am convinced that God does not make mistakes. God knew what God was calling when he called me to the priesthood, and that God wants me to be a black gay man who is pulling the church, kicking and screaming into deeper fidelity with the will of God. So I'm trying to help the church catch up to what God has already done. Because God is always ahead of the church. There is no church that's ahead of God, because that would mean making human beings ahead of. No. We need to have people within our churches who will help our churches be more and more who they say they are. And for the Catholic Church, it means being more and more truly Catholic. And all Catholics we learn as little kids, Catholic means universal. Right. That means all. And so my goal is to help the Catholic Church live up to and be what it says it is. That's my goal, that's my purpose, that's my passion, that's my dream. That's what I'm here.
I struggle with that a lot because,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a pastor's daughter, so I'm a PK. So the idea of trying to live fully and authentically through the lens of the church, where you can put the church in a timeout and you determine when you want to go back to it. But it means you're wrestling with God's word all the time.
All the time. And you're wrestling because, you know, I'd be lying if I said that I never had doubts. Or that, well, maybe they're right. Who am I to be standing up against this institution called the Catholic Church? But our ultimate loyalty is to, as a Christian, for me, to the Spirit of Christ. And for me, the passage that speaks most of that is from the Gospel of John, John 10:10. Catholics can quote Scripture too. I have come that you might have life and live it abundantly, live it to the full. Human flourishing is what God's dream is for all of us. And if any church doctrine gets in the way of that, then we have to question that because it's not Christ-like. And every church, every religion is a human institution. That means it has virtues and it has vices. Right. It has grace and it has shortcomings. And so when I say I'm a Catholic, I'm a proud Catholic. But I am not going to stand up here and say that the Catholic Church is perfect. Absolutely not. But that's not a reason for me to leave it. I think that people have to sometimes take a time out from it for their mental and emotional and spiritual sanity sometimes. Absolutely. I don't begrudge anyone that. I've done it myself. But what draws me back is that I want to be part of that project of helping the church be what it was meant to be.
Which gets into the notion of love, because there's something here that's deeper than what you're doing, because it's the love of God's word. It's the love of working for people and having God work through you that you're getting into. Because you write about what does it mean to be loved and what does it mean to be loved as a black person. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
I am so glad you asked that question because no one ever asked me to talk about that. No, seriously. In the summer of 2020, after George Floyd died, or was killed, murdered, lynched, let's put it be blunt, I was on tons of media and things like that. It was too much because you're trying to be in public and trying to be professional and trying to help other people understand our pain, but you can't get angry while you're doing it, even when they ask crazy questions. And so you're trying to be professional, but I'm dying inside because I got to the point I could not watch that video anymore. Yeah. And then someone asked me to write something about I said, I have nothing more to write. But then in the end, I said, even after the exhaustion, my mind turned to love. Love of blackness, love of black bodies, love of black people. Because you see, that's what the Black Lives Matter movement is all about. I think we forget about the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement. It didn't come into existence to be only about, against police misconduct and violence or whatever. It began with one of the founders talking about sending love notes to black people after the acquittal of after the acquittal for Trayvon Martin. And she said, we're sending love notes saying, you are enough, you are enough. And we don't deserve to die, and we don't deserve to be shot because we are loved and we are lovable. That Black Lives Matter is about black people being worthy of being loved. And because we are lovable and worthy of being loved, our lives are holy and deserve respect. And so my next project is working on a book to develop a critical black love ethics. But what I really want to talk about is the fact that we're called to love our flesh, and that it's not enough to be anti-racist.
Right.
Because that's something you're against. I want to challenge people to be pro-black love. And what does it mean to love black people and black bodies and black flesh in a context of anti-blackness? How radical is it to say that the black body that has been coded to be the carrier of everything that's evil and base and dangerous, that body is worthy of being loved? And that's something that, unfortunately, we as black people also need to know. Because sometimes we can cut each other worse than, some of the worst things that I've ever gone through have been coming from other black people. And we all know that. Because we've been indoctrinated in this culture, we have to learn how to love ourselves and how to love each other. We really do.
I'm thinking here about what does it mean to kind of fight two battles at one time. Because if you're talking,
at least.
I mean, you mentioned Black Lives Matter, which helping people to understand that it's Black Lives Matter too, not only Black Lives Matter. That, when I speak about this and speak about Black Lives Matter, the most difficult part is trying to convince black folks that our lives matter, that the lies about you are simply lies.
Yes.
But how do we help them to recognize the truth, since the lies are something coming at them all the time? And it's like, no, you have to be able to write a different narrative, even if nobody else can give you a pencil. You got to borrow one and write that narrative for yourself.
Exactly, because the thing is, we've been also raised in this culture and being brainwashed. And let me give a real common example of this. I don't know of any black family that hasn't grown up hearing about good hair versus bad hair. I see all the black folks nodding their heads. Okay, y'all know, okay. The fact is that we've been growing up to say that features that approximate white features are more prized, more beautiful, more valuable. And even when, we've internalized that anti-black narrative ourselves. And we sometimes, as black people, especially in white spaces, we have to sometimes struggle against what I call the imposter syndrome, that we don't really belong here.
Right.
When I was at Marquette as an undergraduate, I was the first and the only black person in the honors program at Marquette. And at first they said my SAT score was too small, too low to get in. But I wrote a killer essay on the application. They had to admit me. I remember sitting in honors English, and the professor says, I want you to write a 500-word expository essay on Chaucer doing whatever he's doing. Okay, fine. I said, a 500-word expository essay? What's an expository essay? I had never heard the phrase in my life. And I thought, I don't belong here. They were right. And then I was talking to a classmate and he said, when are you going to start on the paper? I said, what paper? Well, the essay is just a paper. I said, a paper? Why didn't the professor say write a paper? I know how to write a paper. I know what a paper is. But notice that the first thing I did was to doubt my ability to be in that space. Because that's the constant tape that we hear as people of color, that we somehow don't belong. We have to prove that we belong. We have to prove that we're worthy. And that's a lifelong battle of learning to deconstruct that tape and to create a new narrative that's rooted in a love and to see myself as lovable. But that's not a one-time battle. That's a constant battle, a constant struggle. And it's not one we do alone, it's one we do with others around us who can believe in us even when we don't believe in ourselves.
Now, you mentioned Dr. King's speech, the last one he gave. I want to go to the last one he wrote that he never had a chance to give.
Okay.
That he was actually working on a sermon, What If America's Going to Hell? Like this whole idea that from where he was sitting, thinking about the three evils, right? So militarism, materialism, and thinking about racism. That with these three evils, America may not be on its way to being blessed, but America might be on its way to hell in the way it's being conceived. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, that's 68 to where we are today, and I'm not sure if we've moved too far away from that.
I'm glad you brought that up because, as I tried to do in my talk and as we're doing now, all too often with the holiday king, we freeze him in 1963. And we forget that King lived a long time after that. And his message, he became more and more disillusioned in America. He never gave up hope for its redemption, but he became more disillusioned with it. And he said, yeah, maybe it is going to hell, because he said America needs what he called a revolution of values. That it's not enough to just appeal to the Constitution for the American dream or the Declaration of Independence. We need a fundamental revolution of values. And we have never really embraced that part of Martin Luther King. It goes back to not only the unpublished sermon you're talking about, but his last book. Where do we go from here, chaos or community? And it's a question mark, a question mark. And he said that the civil rights movement had two phases. The first phase was a struggle for decency, for the nation to treat black people with a measure of decency. But then he said the second phase was a struggle for genuine equality. And when we moved to that phase of genuine equality, many white allies in the first struggle dropped away from the second because equality was going to be costly.
Yes.
It costs nothing to integrate a lunch counter. It costs nothing to integrate a bus. But if you're going to have quality education, that's expensive. If you're going to talk about quality housing, that's expensive. And he said basically, people looked at the price of equality and said that's a price too high. We are still in the unfinished business of the civil rights movement. And what's terrifying me, frankly, is I think that we're going back into phase one, where we're still working for the struggle for decency right now. Because right now what's going on in our country is that the forces of undecency have become powerful and mobilized where, face it, I'm going to be blunt here, it means something when the highest elected official in the nation can denigrate women and people of color and immigrants and give people permission that this is acceptable public discourse. We're fighting again just the basic struggle for decency.
It's hard to wrestle with the Dr. King after 63. I mean, you talk about the civil rights movement, he mentioned in 2 phases. I really see Dr. King in 2 phases. I see the Dr. King up to 63. I think he was younger. He was very excited about his family. He had young kids. And there was a little bit of celebrityhood there, too, right? You walk into a town, Dr. King's here, and everything you say is like Bible in gold. After his approval rating began to fall, with the multiple bombings on his house, after being arrested over 30 times, the multiple attempts on his life, bombs on planes when he had to get off. Like, the Dr. King after 63, after that church was bombed and those little girls were killed, it's hard to wrestle with him. His work is depressing. It makes you angry. It makes you sad. There are points in there where he actually gives up hope, and he writes about that, and then he has to start all over again.
And not only that, we also don't talk about this, that Dr. King had to leave his church denomination. He was a member of the National Baptist Convention, but a lot of the National Baptist ministers were not his allies. And so he left and started to join the Progressive Baptist Church. He had to leave his own church home because his own church home could not support him and did not support him. I think we have to understand that we always look at Martin Luther King as being a faith leader, and he was, but Martin Luther King struggled with the church.
Yes, yes.
When you read a letter from Birmingham jail,
It's a struggle.
it is a struggle. And he even says, maybe I have been too optimistic. Maybe the church in organized religion is incapable. He wrestles with the fact, is it even possible for organized religion to be the carrier for this vision of a just society? And he says, I have to turn my faith to the church within the church, he says, the inner ecclesia. And so going back to your question, yeah, I think that when he came to realize the depth of racism, his dream had to become deeper too. And he had to move from, I think, a kind of sense of optimism, that things are going to get better and better, to a sense of hope. And hope is different than optimism. And optimism is the American virtue. It's what we sell in all the media, that, you know, the good guys always win, and sooner rather than later. It's like living, you know, it's like living in a perpetual, like, underdog, you know, episode, you know, or a cartoon where, you know, things are bad, but you know the good people are always going to win in the end. Whereas hope is very different. Hope understands that the good don't always win. That defeat and loss are real. And yet, it refuses to accept that defeat and loss are the final words. And so, at the end of his life, King is wrestling with this. He says, I've seen my dream turn into a nightmare. My dreams were blasted. And yet, he hopes. And this is why I find the Black imagination so wonderful. The Black imagination at its best does not deny reality. It doesn't deny that evil is real and that obstacles are real, but refuses to accept that as being the final word.
But hope takes maturity. I think hope takes some time. I mean, I'm trying to sit here as you're thinking about, the younger me. I mean, the number of Dr. King holidays that I've lived through, and how, when you're young, you're thinking, we can burn it all down. Like, all I have to do is march, and we're going to change America. And by the time I do, then I'm going to be lifted up, because that's going to be my legacy. And then you start dealing with defeat and loss, and the reality of how entrenched white supremacy is into the fabric of this country, that you have to have a certain level of maturity just to be able to have hope.
Yeah.
That something's going to change.
Yeah. And I think that's why I think it's so important to think about what we're doing, justice work, as a relay race. And when you run a relay race, your goal isn't necessarily to be the one that breaks the tape at the end. You're running your best race and doing your work, both to honor those who ran before you and for the sake of those who are going to run after you. And so I think that we need to help our students and help us all to understand that we're part of a relay race. So what does success look like for me? It's not necessarily to be the one that, because of what I do, I'm going to see, the end of white supremacy. I mean, that's not going to happen. But to do what I'm doing for the sake of those who are going to come after me. I told this story when I met with the students earlier. By the way, shout out to the students I met with earlier. Y'all are awesome. I wish I could bottle you and take you back to Fordham with me. You were awesome. But I want to tell you a story, because it's a true story. I told them a story that when I was young, my grandmother, she had an old Rambler car, and those Rambler cars had the oversized steering wheel and a long seat in front, no bucket seats. And my grandmother didn't believe in seat belts. And so whenever we came to a stop sign, she put her arm out there like that to hold you back.
I still do that with my kids, and we have seatbelts.
Right, okay.
I think it's a mother instinct. I don't know.
But anyway, and we know with our adult minds that if we had really been in an accident, that arm was not going to help you any. But it feels good to know that your grandmother had you in her arms, okay? So we were driving, and we came to a stop sign, because my grandmother, I remember, put her arm out there to hold me back. And we said, stop for the longest period of time. And I said, Grandma, when are we going to go? Because we're going to go to the store. She's going to buy me something. And she said, oh, we'll go, baby, as soon as the people stop going by. And I looked out the car window, and I saw all these people marching down the street. And I said, Grandma, what are they doing? Why are they marching? And she must have spoke this in that word, in that tone that adults give, that you're supposed to remember. Because I remember distinctly, as an 8, she said, they're marching for your rights. They're marching to set us free. Now, those folks who were marching didn't know there was an 8-year-old kid that just wanted them to get out of the way so I could get to the store. But my adult mind knows that I would not be where I am now. I could not be here at Loyola University if it weren't for what they did then. I couldn't thank them. They don't even know I exist. But I know that I am part of that relay race. And so what keeps me going is to realize that there are people coming up after me who need me to do my work now so they can do what they're doing. And I may not ever know who they are. One of the things as a teacher, sometimes a former student will write you a letter and you find out, oh, something sunk in after all. But we're part of a relay race. My goal is not to be the one that says that I witnessed the downfall of white supremacy. My goal is to be part of that chain that eventually makes it possible. And that maybe my hope, my dream, is that there are some students out here who are going to do the work I do and more and build on it and take it places I can't even imagine so that they can be part of that relay race.
What does radical self-care look like for you? Because at the end of Dr. King's life, when he was assassinated, when they looked at his heart, they said his heart was like the heart of a 90-year-old man because of all the stress he was under, everything that was happening to him internally that you couldn't see on the outside. So now we're talking in the Black community for people doing this work about radical self-care so that we don't end our lives sooner than the tape is set up for us because of the way we're pushing so hard to change America that we are neglecting to take care of ourselves.
One of the things that in the Black Catholic experience is that so many of our Black Catholic leaders died so soon and so young. I think of Theo Bowman, who died not even being 60 years old. There are so many who have died prematurely because of the stress of doing this work. It's hard enough to just be a Black person, a person of color in America, but now when you're actively working for justice and calling out white supremacy and, being the person in the meeting that has to raise the issue yet again, and you have to be yet that person, and you're constantly thinking, how can I raise this issue and not come across as the angry Black man, even though they're going to call me an angry Black man anyway, and you're always doing this kind of work, and it is stressful. And so what does radical self-care look like for me? I have to confess that I haven't always done that work well. I'll be honest. It was in the fall of 2020, after the summer of 2020, that I was hospitalized with severe, lower GI bleeding. And, there's physical causes for it, but a lot of it was stress. And that was a wake-up call for me, because this work is still too important. I still have work to do, but I also know I can't do the work unless I take care of myself. So what does self-care look like? It means sometimes saying no to invitations. It means sometimes saying, you want me to speak here, but I can't because I need to take some downtime for myself. Radical self-care means sometimes I have some dear Black gay friends who live in Montgomery, Alabama. And so I go and I spend Thanksgiving with them. I spend Christmas with them. They cook all these delightful Southern foods that are probably bad for my health, but they make me feel good. That's what radical self-care looks like. Radical self-care looks like calling two of my closest friends in New York and telling them I'm tired. Or them telling me, you're tired. you gotta stop. Radical self-care for me looks like my family we had a family reunion in Las Vegas, and I said, one of these days I'm doing a spa day. And y'all can do what you want to do. I'm going to Caesar's Palace. It's got the best spa in Las Vegas. And I'm going to get myself a 90-minute massage. It's wonderful. I'm going to get my nails done, because Black men, we can get our nails done. It's masculine. Don't worry about it. That's also part of radical self-care, to say that my body deserves to be pampered. My body deserves care. But I'll be honest and say it's a work in progress. I'm not always really good at it.
That's a radical idea within the Black community, because our bodies have always been used for profit for this system.
Right.
I mean, they've always profited off of our blood, our sweat, our tears. Our bodies are machines and tools used to hold up this system. So the idea that I can step back and say, my body needs to be loved. It needs to be
Yes.
valued. Meaning, what I'm saying is, I need to be loved. I need to be valued.
And one of the things I do is I try to, commit to getting 7 hours of sleep at night. And because I realize that, when I'm exhausted, I can't do good work. But yeah, to see that my body, because we're not trained how to take care of our bodies. We see it as a luxury where it's really a necessity. Because me dying, I hate to be that blunt, okay, but you're asking all the right questions. I've never talked like this before. Me dying prematurely doesn't help anyone. And it doesn't help the kingdom of God. Now, if crucifixion comes, it comes, but I'm not to be called to crucify myself. I'm called to care for myself so that I can be the best agent of God, bringing about God's dream of a just world where everyone is valued as the sacred image of God that they are. You see, we have to understand something. We don't give people worth. We don't give people value. We don't give people dignity. It's already there by the virtue of being created in God's image. All we're called to do is to recognize and respect what God has already done. And in Catholic social teaching, plug in for Catholic social teaching, the fundamental principle of Catholic social teaching is the dignity and value of every human person as created in God's image. And when I teach that to my kids, I said all means all, no small print, no exceptions. Now, does the church live out that message? No. But what we do then is that we show the Catholic Church, this is what you believe, so now let's go about and become more and more like that. And so our call is not to give people dignity. Our call is to respect the dignity that is already there. It's already there. And put a Jesuit spin on it, because that's where we are, a Jesuit institution. And I'm not a Jesuit, by the way, and your president isn't a Jesuit, but you don't have to be a Jesuit to value a nation values, okay? I'm just putting that out there. Finding God in all things. But I want to change it. Finding God in all people. That's what we're called to do for the greater honor and glory of God. We're called to see God in all people. And what keeps me going is that I hope that by who I am and how I teach, I can help my students to see God in all people.
My last question for you, and I really appreciate you being so candid and so open. When my Nana made a decision that she was done, she actually said, I am finished with this kind of human experiment. And she used to always talk about running on ahead to see how the end is going to be. And she's like, I'm ready to run on ahead to see how the end is going to be. And when I'm gone, I want you to tell them this about me. I want you to just imagine with me that you're running on ahead a little bit to see how the end is going to be. When they talk about you and they talk about what you've done, what do you want them to know about what your human experience was like?
I hope somebody's taping this because you are wonderful. I hope that they say that Bryan Massingale was a man who lived God's future in the present tense. that I hope that they say that Bryan Massingale was a man who really believed in this future vision so much that he didn't want to wait for it to happen. He wanted to help create it even now. I've never said that out loud. I've only written that in my journal. So you got me to say something out loud. But yeah, that I'm a man who tried to live God's future right now.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. This is beautiful. Thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you.
You're awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Massingale. Thank you also to Dr. K. Whitehead. You were exceptional. Thank you so much. And before we leave tonight, I just wanted to say thank you to our event services staff who helped to support us, to the environmental services staff. We don't necessarily see them, but they do so much work to prepare for all of our events, and we want to take the time to appreciate them for their service to the university. If you don't mind, let's just thank them. And last but not least, thank you all for joining us tonight, those that are in person and those that chose to join us virtually. This has been an awesome occasion, and it will be one for the books. And so, Father Massingale, thank you so much. We're probably going to end up having you back, too. So, all right. Thank you, and you can all have a good night. God bless.